Welcome again to another of our studies of the End Times for Beginners. We have reached study number 14 in our progress and in our program. And you will see that the topic for this study is one of the most strange things, one of the most strange symbols in the very middle of a book that is absolutely full of symbols. That is the mark of the beast. We can't fully explain it and we don't really understand it, but we're going to speak a little bit about it in this session and set the context and the time period around it, because that is most important to bring confidence to the heart of those who are listening today, no matter how bad things are around us just now. And this generation and the upcoming young generation that I'm speaking to are seeing things that we and they have never seen before. And yet, there was a generation that lived back in the 1930s. There was a generation that lived back in the 1910s. There was a generation that lived in the 1800s. There was a generation that lived in the 1400s and the 1500s, the time of the Great Reformation. There was a generation that lived in the Dark Ages, a time of grievous and gross persecution, probably the most similar to what will be in the last 3.5 of this 7-year period. And there were Christians that lived away back in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century of the church. And they also saw tremendous difficulty and tremendous persecution of Christians. The word unprecedented has been used very often by the media, to the point where it is overused and overplayed. And yet, we are seeing things happening in our world today in terms of technology and medicine, in terms of what the Bible calls, using an old word, the development of pestilence. The rapidity of how these things move around the globe. We have never really seen those things in our world before. What we are not seeing, if you get nothing else from this message in this particular study, get this. Dear believer, dear child of God, young or old, what is developing just now in our world, in relation not only to pestilence and virus, but also to vaccine, is not at this point in time the 666. We will look a little bit at the detail of that, and you'll come to understand that where we are today is not yet where this will be very firmly in. We look at the period very firmly in the second half of the 7-year period. Even if you disagree with me, and some do, about the exact timing of when the church will be taken away, this that we are speaking of here in this study today does not come into play and does not come into power and does not become mandatory until the second half of this 7-year period. We can prove that from the Word of God. Let's read in the book of Revelation in chapter number 13. He, that is the false prophet, the second beast, the beast out of the land, had power to give breath unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause. That means the image has got artificial intelligence. It not only can talk, but it can choose, speak and cause, that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. There's a trinity. Three groups of people set out. We're going to see a great number of trinities in these passages. God is emphasizing for us that these are evil trinities, not divine ones. We've already seen the tremendous trinity of evil, the dragon, the first beast, and the second beast. Now here's a trinity of mankind, small and great, and rich and poor, and free and bond. To receive, that's an interesting word, we'll look at it. To receive a mark in their right hand or on their forehead, that no man might buy or sell unless he had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number, not 666 as we see it written down, and not 666 as we would count it in our English numerics. His number is 600. That's a number by itself. And 60, that's a number by itself. And 6. And when you add those, there's another trinity. And when you add those three numbers together, of course, you get the mathematical calculation of 666. Let's read chapter 14 and verse number 1. John says, I looked. His key word. I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written. Completely different word, written on their foreheads. May God bless this reading to our hearts again. We looked in chapter number 12 and across into chapter 13 without really any chapter break, because the chapter divisions are not inspired. We looked in this pause in the judgment period at 7 personalities God is showing us. The seals have been opened, the trumpets have been blown, and before the bowls are poured out, God is pausing in the judgment program, and he's causing John to look back into the Alpha past and look forward into the Omega future. And then in the context of that broad perspective, he's explaining to John about this tremendous conflict that is going to have its climax in the very center point of the 7-year period. Those 7 personalities divide into a 4 and a 3. That shouldn't surprise us, because almost all the 7s in the Bible divide into a 4 and a 3. Way back there in Genesis chapter number 1, where we get the very first 7, if you go back and read it, you'll find that for 3 days God was forming, and then for the rest of the week God was filling, and then when he had filled, he was resting in satisfaction in what he had done. You can divide that 7 into a 4 and a 3, and so many other 7s as well. Even the 7 times that Jesus spoke on the cross, 3 times he spoke directly to his God and Father. The other 4 times he addressed in different forms people that were standing around. It's a lovely study to look at the 7s in the Bible and divide them into 4. This 7 divides into 4 and 3 as well. We have a spiritual 7. We have the woman. We saw that she represents right down through time from Abraham right until the end of the kingdom period. She represents the nation of Israel. God promised that nation to Abraham in Genesis 12, and God promised that nation a land and a kingdom and a throne to David and to others, and it must be fulfilled. The woman brought forth the man-child Messiah. That's why Satan hates Israel, because Israel was the tiny little nation that God preserved. A little line of moral purity inside the nation, right down to Mary, that God might bring forth his son, Genesis 3:15, seed of the woman. Then we have the remnant of her seed, what is left alive at the end of the 7-year period after an intense persecution, not only of tribulation saints, but of those who are Jews who have acknowledged that their Messiah is coming, that this man is not the false Messiah. Then we have Michael the archangel, the one who steps in when there is conflict in relation to Israel and the purposes of God for his earthly people. An amazing study of Michael down through the Bible, and so there's a lovely holy four together in the first part of the passage. Then we see that the other three make an infernal and unholy and evil trinity. The dragon, who is anti-God. The first beast out of the nations, southern European, linked with those who destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, the prince that shall come, Antichrist. And then this second beast out of the land, an Israeli Jew that we have read about specifically in our passage today. And he represents anti-spirit. He is against. He is a false picture of the Spirit of God, and he is directing the worship of the world and the people of the world and the religions of the world. First of all, by acclaim, and then from the center part of the 7-year period until the conclusion, by enforcement, that there is no one else to be worshipped, and there is no one else that can be worshipped. That's where we've got to in our study. The period in view is the second half of the 7 years. Well, you say, David, can you prove that? Or is that just something that you're fitting into your No. We can prove that from the study of the Word of God. Way back in Daniel chapter number 9 and verse number 27, Daniel said, and back then Daniel himself couldn't have understood what he was saying. Daniel said, in the middle of this week of sevens, and we know by prophecy moving forward it must be a 7-year period. In the middle of that 7-year period, he, that is the beast, will cause the sacrifice and the offerings to cease. And so these terrible things, Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, great tribulation, Jesus called it, Matthew 24. These things happen in the second half of the 7-year period. Chapter 12 and verse number 6, it talks about the remnant that we've already spoken of, having a safe place in the wilderness for 1,260 days. It speaks in chapter 13 in verse number 5 about this first beast. It says that when he comes back again, after what appears to be his death and resurrection, his whole authority and power and presence and position changes, and then he will continue for 42 months. And you combine those things together, 3.5 years, 1,260 days, and 42 months, and you divide them into each other, and you get 3.5 prophetic years of 360 days per year. What we're speaking of in this study today is very much what will happen from here, from the center point. And that's why on the chart, the 666 appears right here in the middle point. A strange mark, a strange name, and a strange number that we cannot fully explain today, but we see shadows of it. A famous prophetic writer of the past, he's long since gone to heaven. He said, coming event. prophets in prophecy cast their shadows backwards into our time. We're seeing things happening today. If you're not saved, you must listen for eternity and listen for your soul. Things that are happening today that are shadows of things that will soon to come. The period. Let's say a little bit just now about the proposal. That's very simple. It lies right on the surface of the passage. The proposal of this second beast, the false prophet. I have heard some people calling him the spin doctor of this global king, this Superman. I understand why in the Western world, Britain and Canada and the US, we might talk about him in a paraphrase as being a spin doctor. I think most people understand the term. I think if I was speaking on these subjects in Africa, and I have done for many years in the past, I don't think I'd call him a spin doctor. I think I'd call him a witch doctor. He's going to be the henchman, the supporter. He's going to be the religious figure in the background, coming into increasing prominence until the middle point is reached. And then he's going to be seen to be the one who holds the power of the powers of darkness, to exercise the power of the dragon and the authority of the first beast, to make fire come down from heaven, to work miracles in front of him and in front of the cameras of the world, and prove to people that he has the power of the other world. It is the power of Satan's world, not the purity of the power of God's world. And yet 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 tells us that God himself is going to send the delusion. We'll see that in another passage, referred to in a different way in the book of Revelation. The delusion is God sent. That this world, those who have turned their back on the truth and reality of Jesus Christ and his cross, will see this man and his image as being the true Messiah, and will probably also, I say it very carefully, see the dragon himself, because the dragon is not hidden at this point. The dragon allows himself to come into prominence and be talked about. It will not be secret or accidental worship of Satan. It will be deliberate. People will be worshipping the dragon, and they'll know they're worshipping the powers of darkness as God. His proposal: worship a man, worship the image, worship the dragon. The dragon is God, and the man whose image will be made, and I do believe set in the very temple court itself. I think that is what the abomination of desolation is. I don't think that refers specifically to the man. I think it refers to the image of the man, that I think it will be a proper statue. I think they'll put it in place of the altar and the sacrifices that have been stopped. They'll put it in the sanctuary court on the mountain of the temple in Jerusalem. And they'll tell false Christianity, and they'll tell Islam, and they'll tell all the religions of the East, and they'll tell the Jew as well, that he is God. And the image is in place of his altar. And you bow before it, and you worship him, or else there is a penalty, or else you die. There is a way out, of course. It is not absolutely necessary that every single person must. No. Sadly, many will. But I think there will be a far bigger number than we think. You know, God doesn't always work with little tiny numbers, but God often works with hidden secret numbers. millions in China that we don't appreciate today, or in Yemen, or in North Korea, or in lands like that, because we're not communicating directly with them. It's easy to see the appearance of Christianity in the West, and it's also apparent that there is much falseness in professing Christianity in the West. Much of what we see in relation to size and volume today is not true, it is false. True Christianity in this period of 3.5 years will be very different, because it will be either worship Antichrist and his image, or acknowledge the person of Christ, and if you do, you will give your life for Christ. But Jesus tells those who will be in this period, there's a blessing for those who die. It is actually better to die for Christ and be with Christ than it is to live without Christ by claiming Antichrist. You say, but David, it will be instant martyrdom. Yes, it will. But I don't think it will be a few. I think there will be a great multitude, because it's spoken of in more than once, and at least one of the multitudes in Revelation, I think, is a multitude that came out of tribulation. Not just church saints, you know. Not just a Jewish remnant, no, though we did read about that, the 144,000, 12,000 out of every tribe who are sealed before this period starts, so that even the dragon, the devil, Satan, the serpent, the wicked one, and his henchmen, they cannot destroy Israel. They cannot even martyr all of Israel. There cannot be no Jews left alive, no. There must be a remnant, and the absolute minimum of that remnant must be a representative of every individual tribe. If they could destroy and wipe a tribe out that none were left, the promises of God through Abraham to Jacob and the tribes and David would be broken. And God will bring, apart from those that he will raise from martyrdom at the end of the period to populate the kingdom, God will preserve the beginnings of the nation in the very first day of the kingdom when he sets it up. Will not only be those who are raised at the end of tribulation, and Old Testament Jews as well, like Daniel, for he spoke of it, but those that God will preserve, a minimum of 12,000 from each tribe. Isn't it amazing that when we're going to speak just now about a seal and a mark upon the forehead and upon the right hand, that the passage tells us, chapter 7 before it starts and chapter 14 after it finishes, that the 144,000 Jews have God's name, his seal, written upon their forehead. His proclamation. Let's come back to the negative side of the story. His proclamation, he causeth all. Here's another trinity. I highlighted that in the reading. Small and great, rich and poor, bond and free. We saw in the trumpet judgments, we saw in the seal judgments, we saw back in the famine and the black horse, we saw a difference and a division between those who were poor and those who were rich. Now that division doesn't exist. The rich people cannot avoid, those who are connected, those who are kings and have ruled with him, those who are great men, the magnates, and the corporate heads of planet Earth, well connected with these kind of people who have served him, they're not separated from what is here. Everyone, small and great, poor and rich, bond and free, they have to receive. Here's another Trinity. They have to receive. And there is an order here, either a mark, or a name, or a number. And the Spirit of God says, here is wisdom. I don't think that we can explain it. I don't think that we can fully understand it. But those that live in this day, in the first part of the 7 years, they'll see it coming. Those of us who are alive today, as we get closer to the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ for his saints, and as we see the spirit of lawlessness coming towards the lawless man who will be set loose, 2 Thessalonians 2, as we see the spirit of lawlessness working increasingly, and we do, we see more and more hints of what is going to take place and how this is going to work. But only those who will be here in the center of the period will fully understand what is going to happen. The mark, it actually means something cut into the skin. If we were paraphrasing this word today and writing maybe a modern English version of the Bible, we might even think about using the word tattoo. It's amazing how that has become a fashion statement to the point of normality, isn't it? The Western world in which we live, and even other parts of the world that I have travelled in, we've reached a stage where it nearly appears to be the minority who are not marked. I have a strange feeling that maybe this original mark that will identify people with this man will actually be given free at the start. People will want to have it. Today you might get a baseball cap with a team or a person or a name, and you might get it as a gift if you're in the right place at the right time, and you might put it on your head and you might wear it, and it will identify you with the following of a certain group or person. And the very beginning of this mark might be something similar. The second word that's used is a name. The background of that word is really connected with the authority of the one who gives it and the authority that you are associated with. And the third word that is used is the word number. It's actually in the original language where our English word arithmetic comes from. It is a calculation. I touched on that already. In the Greek language in which the New Testament was written, they don't use 666 as we understand it today. It actually was written down as three separate, not even three separate numbers, three separate words. If I was going to try and pronounce them in very bad Greek, I would say kai, zai, and the third one, the 6, stigma. Oh, you say, but that's an English word. Yes, it is. It is sometimes used very wrongly in relation to the wounds in the hands of Jesus. No, that's a wrong use of the word. Interesting that this word is here. I wonder when we set the 600 and the 60 and the 6, when we set them down as three separate numbers before we add them up and get 660 and 6. I wonder, are we meant to see a trinity there? And I wonder if one number is connected, the largest one with the dragon, and the second one with the first beast, and maybe even the third one with the second beast, the infernal trinity. And then the stigma word, which actually means in the old original languages one who has been marked by the gods. I wonder, does that take us back again to something mysterious that I hinted at in the previous study in Zechariah chapter number 11? The shepherd with the strange wounds, who is not a shepherd of shepherding, but a shepherd of idolatrous worship, who has a wound in his right eye and in his right arm. The very two places that are mentioned in this passage, that the identifying mark or brand of those who are associated with this image and the beast is to be taken. You take the mark in your right hand or in your right eye, or on your forehead, probably right beside your eye, or maybe even on your iris. These things are possible. Direct association with not only being marked, but being marked in the very parts of the body visibly that connects us with the one who is directing worship to the beast and the image and the dragon. I wonder, is the wounded shepherd in Zechariah chapter number 11, I wonder, is he actually not the one who was cut down, but maybe one who was even wounded in the cutting down of the first beast? I was reading the story just in the past week to refresh my mind about assassinations of American presidents. And if I asked you how many American presidents have been assassinated in history, starting with Abraham Lincoln, different people would give me different answers. Because some of you would count the ones who were assassinated and died. And some older people might count ones who were assassinated but survived. Oh, you forget about them, you see, like Ronald Reagan, because two men moved in front, a policeman and a bodyguard, and they took wounds that were intended for the president. And because the president received less bullets by the grace of God, he survived, and we forget that he was meant to be assassinated. And we also forget about men who were cut down and wounded, and they survived for a time on his behalf. And maybe that's a picture of what we have in here. You say, but what is the mark? Because I want to know, I want you to tell me. The answer is, we don't know. Those who are alive here and receive it, knowingly so, because they'll understand it is to worship the dragon, and it is to worship Antichrist, and it is to worship the image. It is to turn your back on Christ and God. It will not be something that comes by accident that people don't know about. It won't come in such a way that nobody knows what's happening or what they're taking, because there is a deliberate association. Revelation makes that clear. Those who take it will know what they're doing, and they'll know who they're worshipping. The people who work in the science of this kind of thing today, they've got an interesting expression. Let me just pause and give you this for a second. They talk about, in terms of security, especially in devices and on the internet, they talk about three-factor identification. That sounds complicated, but it's not. Just listen, because we actually understand it. We just don't always use the terms. The first level is what you have. A key to open your car. No, you say, David, I don't have a key to open my car like that. I've got a button that I press, it goes pip, pip, and my car opens, and it goes pip, 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 and my car locks. And if the hood or the bonnet is not closed properly, it gives a different kind of pip to let me know that the trunk or the boot or the doors or something's not shut. We take all that for granted. First level of security, what you have. Your card with a little chip, and all of us knows that the only bit of the card that matters is where the little chip is. And then what you know. There's level 2, two-level security. What you know, your PIN code. The number that goes with the chip, sometimes you're asked. Even in the store, you swipe, and then on one particular occasion in the grocery store, they say, oh no, sorry, it's not working. Just to confirm, put it in, please, and put in your second level of identification, put in your PIN. Then we come to what's called third level identification, not what you have and what you know, but what you are. I've been to places in the world where that's beginning to work. You stand in a line in some places at a passport queue. I take off my spectacles, and if I visited that country before, they actually look for recognition of the inside of my eye. And they know that I am actually the person whose two-dimensional picture is on the passport. The iris of your eye, the veins in the back of your hand, your fingerprint, and that's not even the prominent one now because they've learned that that is not so hard to change. And then the fourth aspect of that, bringing all these other things together, and that's moving even in the background of our world, the chip itself. Radio frequency identification devices, RFID, that can be implanted as easily as a vaccine, with a tiny needle in the hand or in the shoulder or even in the head. It's done on certain animals in certain parts of the world. And third level identification, bringing the whole thing together. We're not sure what will happen, and we're not sure how it will work. But this we do know, that nobody can buy and nobody can sell. Buyer and seller, merchant and shopper, wholesaler, all affected by the mark of the beast, the prohibition. And then we saw in chapter 14, let's finish there, the perfect contrast. 144,000, we were introduced to them in chapter 7. We didn't touch on that, maybe at the time. Before all this started, God sealed them on purpose. While this is all going on, they cannot be touched. And right at the end of tribulation, they're seen standing in Mount Zion praising God, because even all the powers of darkness cannot affect the destiny of being with the Lamb and the kingdom of one single one that has been sealed by his Father. You cannot receive both marks. Oh, dear soul, listening to this, it's a wonderful thing to have been to the cross and to be marked, to have the identification with the blood of Jesus, that I never can be marked by these strange things that we don't fully understand, that are soon to come, even into this world. Now, some questions and answers for the younger people that are doing that. And we now have question and answer sheets and PDF that can be sent out. We only have 1 to 13 prepared and sent out, but 14 forward will come soon, so at this point in time you still get the questions, and then you write them down and answer them, and write in with queries or questions or even something you don't agree with. We don't mind. Can you name the 4 personalities linked together at the beginning? That was study number 11, but I mentioned them in the introduction. Can you name the 3 other that I linked together in the introduction to this study? What is the proposal that the false prophet makes? There's more than one answer there. In fact, there might even be a trinity of answers. What does he prohibit? 3 things, another trinity, that link people with the beast. What can you not do if you don't have any of those 3 things? And then what is the number that links people with the identification of the beast? You can give me the number in one way, or if you've been really concentrating, you can give me the number in 3 ways. Then questions and answers to number 13. If you didn't get the PDF sent out by email, where does the second beast appear from? He appears out of the land, which we would considered to be Israel. How many horns does he have? 2. What does he look like? He looks like a lamb. It's almost a counterfeit picture of Jesus. But when he opens his mouth, he talks like a dragon. What is his job? To direct worship to the first beast and away from God. Who is he a false version, a counterfeit of? I hope you're all clear on that by now. He is a false version of and a counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. What is his end? We get that away over in chapter number 19. With the dragon and with the first beast, the 3 of them are consigned together to the lake of fire, because God and his purposes and his person, Jesus Christ, and his people will triumph at the end. May God bless these things to our hearts again, even though they have been solemn and not so easy to consider together. May God bless you all.